This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mark Nelson. Love Among the Chickens by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 16. A Chance Meeting. I roamed the place in search of the varlet for the space of half an hour, and, after having drawn all his familiar haunts, found him at length leaning over the sea-wall near the church, gazing thoughtfully into the waters below. I confronted him. "Well," I said, "you're a beauty, aren't you?" He eyed me owlishly. Even at this early hour I was grieved to see he showed signs of having looked on the bitter while it was brown. His eyes were filmy, and his manner aggressively solemn. "Beauty?" he echoed. "What have you got to say for yourself?" "Say for self." It was plain that he was engaged in pulling his faculties together by some laborious process known only to himself. At present my words conveyed no meaning to him. He was trying to identify me. He had seen me before somewhere, he was certain, but he could not say where or who I was. "I want to know," I said, "what induced you to be such an abject idiot as to let our arrangements get known." I spoke quietly. I was not going to waste the choicer flowers of speech on a man who was incapable of understanding them. Later on, when he had awakened to a sense of his position, I would begin really to talk to him. He continued to stare at me. Then a sudden flash of intelligence lit up his features. "Mr. Garnick," he said at last. "From Chicken Farm," he continued, with the triumphant air of a cross-examining king's counsel who has at last got on the track. "Yes," I said. "Up top the hill," he proceeded, clinchingly. He stretched out a huge hand. "How you?" he inquired with a friendly grin. "I want to know," I said distinctly, "what you've got to say for yourself after letting our affair with the professor become public property." He paused a while in thought. "Dear Sir," he said at last, as if he were dictating a letter, "Dear Sir, I owe you He waved his hand as who should say, "It's a stiff job, but I'm going to do it." "Explation," he said. "You do," I said grimly. "I should like to hear it." "Dear Sir, listen me." "Go on, then." "You came me. You said, 'Hawk, old friend, listen me. You tip this old bufflehead into water,' you said, 'and gormed if I don't give 'ee a pound note.' That's what you said me. Isn't that what you said me?" I did not deny it. "Very well, I said you. Right, I said. I tipped the old soul into water, and got the pound note." "Yes, you took care of that. All this is quite true. But it's beside the point. We're not disputing about what happened. What I want to know, for the third time, is what made you let the cat out of the bag? Why couldn't you keep quiet about it?" He waved his hand. "Dear Sir," he replied, "this way. Listen me." It was a tragic story that he unfolded. My wrath ebbed as I listened. After all, the fellow was not so greatly to blame. I felt that in his place I should have acted as he had done. It was fate's fault, and fate's alone. It appeared that he had not come well out of the matter of the accident. I had not looked at it hitherto from his point of view. While the rescue had left me the popular hero, it had had quite the opposite result for him. He had upset his boat and would have drowned his passenger, said public opinion, if the young hero from London, myself, had not plunged in and at the risk of his life brought the professor ashore. Consequently, he was despised by all as an inefficient boatman. He became a laughing-stock. The local wags made laborious jests when he passed. They offered him fabulous sums to take their worst enemies out for a row with him. They wanted to know when he was going to school to learn his business. In fact, they behaved as wags do and always have done at all times all over the world. Now, all this, it seemed, Mr. Hawk would have borne cheerfully and patiently for my sake, or, at any rate, for the sake of my crisp pound note I had given him, but a fresh factor appeared in the problem, complicating it grievously, to wit, Miss Jane Muskrat. "She said to me," explained Mr. Hawk with pathos, "Harry Hawk, she said, you'm a girt fool, and I don't marry no one as ain't to be trusted in a boat by hisself, and what has jokes made about him by that Tom Lee." "I punch Tom Lee," observed Mr. Hawk parenthetically. "So, she said me, you can go away, and I don't want to see you again." This heartless conduct on the part of Miss Muskrat had had the natural result of making him confess in self-defense, and she had written to the professor the same night. I forgave Mr. Hawk. I think he was hardly sober enough to understand, for he betrayed no emotion. "It is fate, Hawk," I said, "simply fate. There is a divinity that shapes our ends, rough-hew them how we will, and it's no good grumbling." "Yes," said Mr. Hawk, after chewing this sentiment for a while in silence. "So she said me, Hawk, she said like that, you're a girt fool." "That's all right," I replied. "I quite understand. As I say, it's simply fate. Good-bye," and I left him. As I was going back, I met the professor and Phyllis. They passed me without a look. I wandered on in quite a fervor of self-pity. I was in one of those moods when life suddenly seems to become irksome, when the future stretches black and grey in front of me. I should have liked to have faded almost imperceptibly from the world, like Mr. Bardell, even if, as in his case, it had involved being knocked on the head with a pint pot in a public-house cellar. In such a mood it is imperative that one should seek distraction. The shining example of Mr. Harry Hawk did not lure me. Taking to drink would be a nuisance. Work was what I wanted. I would toil like a navvy all day among the fowls, separating them when they fought, gathering in the eggs when they laid, chasing them across country when they got away, and even, if necessity arose, painting their throats with turpentine when they were stricken with roup. Then, after dinner, when the lamps were lit, and Mrs. UKRIDGE nursed Edwin and sewed, and UKRIDGE smoked cigars and incited the gramophone to murder mumbling mows, I would steal away to my bedroom and write, and write, and write, and go on writing till my fingers were numb and my eyes refused to do their duty. And when time had passed, I might come to feel that it was all for the best. A man must go through the fire before he can write his masterpiece. We learn in suffering what we teach in song. What we lose on the swings we make up on the roundabouts. Jerry Garnett, the man, might become a depressed, hopeless wreck, with the iron planted immovably in his soul, but Jeremy Garnett, the author, should turn out such a novel of gloom that strong critics would weep, and the public jostle for copies till Muty's doorway became a shambles. Thus might I some day feel that all this anguish was really a blessing, effectively disguised. But I doubted it. We were none of us very cheerful now at the farm. Even UKRIDGE's spirit was a little daunted by the bills which poured in by every post. It was as if the tradesmen of the neighborhood had formed a league, and were working it in concert. Or it may have been due to thought waves. Little accounts came not in single spies, but in battalions. The popular demand for the sight of the color of his money grew daily. Every morning at breakfast he would give us fresh bulletins of the state of mind of each of our creditors, and thrill us with the announcement that Whiteley's was getting cross and Harrod's jumpy, or that the bearings of Dawlish the grocer were becoming overheated. We lived in a continual atmosphere of worry. Chicken and nothing but chicken at meals, and chicken and nothing but chicken between meals had frayed our nerves. An air of defeat hung over the place. We were a beaten side, and we realized it. We had been playing an uphill game for nearly 2 months, and the strain was beginning to tell. UKRIDGE became uncannily silent. Mrs. UKRIDGE, though she did not understand, I fancy, the details of the matter, was worried because UKRIDGE was. Mrs. Beale had long since been turned into a soured cynic by the lack of chances vouchsafed her for the exercise of her art. And as for me, I have never since spent so profoundly miserably a week. I was not even permitted the anodyne of work. There seemed to be nothing to do on the farm. The chickens were quite happy, and only asked to be let alone and allowed to have their meals at regular intervals. And every day one or more of their number would vanish into the kitchen. Mrs. Beale would serve up the corpse in some cunning disguise, and we would try to delude ourselves into the idea that it was something altogether different. There was one solitary gleam of variety in our menu. An editor sent me a cheque for a set of verses. We cashed that cheque and trooped round the town in a body, laying out the money. We bought a leg of mutton and a tongue and sardines and pineapple chunks and potted meat and many other noble things, and had a perfect banquet. Mrs. Beale, with the scenario of a smile on her face, the first that she had worn in these days of stress, brought in the joint and uncovered it with an air. "Thank God," said UKRIDGE as he began to carve. It was the first time I had ever heard him say a grace, and if ever an occasion merited such a deviation from habit, this occasion did. After that, we relapsed into routine again. Deprived of physical labor, with the exception of golf and bathing, trivial sports compared with work in the fowl run at its hardest, I tried to make up for it by working at my novel. It refused to materialize. The only progress I achieved was with my villain. I drew him from the professor, and made him a blackmailer. He had several other social defects, but that was his profession. That was the thing he did really well. It was on one of the many occasions on which I had sat in my room, pen in hand, through the whole of a lovely afternoon, with no better result than a slight headache, that I bethought me of that little paradise on the Wear Cliff, hung over the sea and backed by green woods. I had not been there for some time, owing principally to an entirely erroneous idea that I could do more solid work sitting in a straight hard chair at a table than lying on soft turf with the sea wind in my eyes. But now the desire to visit that little clearing again drove me from my room. In the drawing-room below, the gramophone was dealing brassily with Mr. Blackman. Outside, the sun was just thinking of setting. The Wear Cliff was the best medicine for me. What does Kipling say? "And soon you will find that the sun and the wind, and the gin of the garden too, have lightened the hump, Cornelius Hump, the hump that is black and blue." His instructions include digging with a hoe and a shovel also, but I could omit that. The sun and the wind were what I needed. I took the upper road. In certain moods I preferred it to the path along the cliff. I walked fast. The exercise was soothing. To reach my favorite clearing, I had to take to the fields on the left, and strike downhill in the direction of the sea. I hurried down the narrow path. I broke into the clearing at a jog trot and stood panting. And at the same moment, looking cool and beautiful in her white dress, Phyllis entered in from the other side. Phyllis without the professor. End of chapter 16. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mark Nelson. Love Among the Chickens by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 17 of A Sentimental Nature. She was wearing a Panama, and she carried a sketching block and camp stool. "Good evening," I said. "Good evening," said she. It is curious how different the same words can sound when spoken by different people. My good evening might have been that of a man with a particularly guilty conscience, caught in the act of doing something more than usually ignoble. She spoke like a rather offended angel. "It's a lovely evening," I went on pluckily. "Very." "The sun set?" "Yes." She raised a pair of blue eyes, devoid of all expression save a faint suggestion of surprise, and gazed through me for a moment at some object a couple of 1,000 miles away, and lowered them again, leaving me with a vague feeling there was something wrong with my personal appearance. Very calmly she moved to the edge of the cliff, arranged her camp stool, and sat down. Neither of us spoke a word. I watched her while she filled a little mug with water from a little bottle, opened her paint box, selected a brush, and placed her sketching block in position. She began to paint. Now, by all the laws of good taste, I should before this have made a dignified exit. It was plain that I was not to be regarded as an essential ornament of this portion of the Wear Cliff. By now, if I had been the perfect gentleman, I ought to have been a quarter of a mile away. But there is a definite limit to what a man can do. I remained. The sinking sun flung a carpet of gold across the sea. Phyllis' hair was tinged with it. Little waves tumbled lazily on the beach below. Except for the song of a distant blackbird running through its repertoire before retiring for the night, everything was silent. She sat there, dipping and painting, and dipping again, and never a word for me, standing patiently and humbly behind her. "Miss Derrick," I said. She half turned her head. "Yes." "Why won't you speak to me?" I said. "I don't understand you." "Why won't you speak to me?" "I think you know, Mr. Garnet." "It is because of the boat accident." "Accident?" "Episode," I amended. She went on painting in silence. From where I stood, I could see her profile. Her chin was tilted. Her expression was determined. "Is it?" I said. "Need we discuss it?" "Not if you do not wish it." I paused. "But," I added, "I should have liked a chance to defend myself. What glorious sunsets there have been these last few days. I believe we shall have this sort of weather for another month." "I should not have thought that possible." "The glass is going up," I said. I was not talking about the weather. It was dull of me to introduce such a worn-out topic. "You said you could defend yourself." "I said I should like the chance to do so." "You have it." "That's very kind of you. Thank you." "Is there any reason for gratitude?" "Every reason." "Go on, Mr. Garnet. I can listen while I paint. Please sit down. I don't like being talked to from a height." I sat down on the grass in front of her, feeling as I did so that the change of position in a manner clipped my wings. It is difficult to speak movingly while sitting on the ground. Instinctively, I avoided eloquence. Standing up, I might have been pathetic and pleading. Sitting down, I was compelled to be matter-of-fact. You remember, of course, the night you and Professor Derrick dined with us. When I say dined, I use the word in a loose sense. For a moment, I thought she was going to smile. We were both thinking of Edwin. But it was only for a moment, and then her face grew cold once more, and the chin resumed its angle of determination. "Yes," she said. "You remember the unfortunate ending of the festivities?" "Well?" "If you recall that at all clearly, you will also remember that the fault was not mine, but UKRIDGE's." "Well?" "It was his behavior that annoyed Professor Derrick. The position then was this, that I was to be cut off from the pleasantest friendship I had ever formed." I stopped for a moment. She bent a little lower over the easel, but remained silent. "Simply through the tactlessness of a prize idiot." "I like Mr. Ukridge." "I like him too, but I can't pretend that he is anything but an idiot at times." "Well?" "I naturally wished to mend matters. It occurred to me that an excellent way would be by doing your father a service. It was seeing him fishing that put the idea of a boat accident into my head. I hoped for a genuine boat accident, but those things only happen when one does not want them, so I determined to engineer one." "You didn't think of the shock to my father." "I did. It worried me very much." "But you upset him all the same." "Reluctantly." She looked up, and our eyes met. I could detect no trace of forgiveness in hers. "You behaved abominably," she said. "I played a risky game, and I lost, and I shall now take the consequences. With luck I should have won. I did not have luck, and I am not going to grumble about it. But I am grateful to you for letting me explain. I should not have liked you to go on thinking that I played practical jokes on my friends. That is all I have to say. I think it was kind of you to listen. Good-bye, Miss Derrick." I got up. "Are you going?" "Why not?" "Please sit down again." "But you wished to be alone. Please sit down." There was a flush on the cheek turned towards me, and the chin was tilted higher. I sat down. To westward the sky changed the hue of a bruised cherry. The sun had sunk below the horizon, and the sea looked cold and leaden. The blackbird had long since flown. "I am glad you told me, Mr. Garnet." She dipped her brush in the water. "Because I don't like to think badly of people." She bent her head over the painting. "Though I still think you behaved very wrongly, and I am afraid my father will never forgive you for what you did." Her father, as if he counted. "But you do?" I said eagerly. "I think you are less to blame than I thought you were at first." "No more than that?" "You can't expect to escape all consequences. You did a very stupid thing." I was tempted. The sky was a dull gray now. It was growing dusk. The grass on which I sat was wet with dew. I stood up. "Isn't it getting a little dark for painting?" I said. "Are you sure you won't catch cold? It's very damp." "Perhaps it is. And it is late, too." She shut her paint box and emptied the little mug onto the grass. "May I carry your things?" I said. I think she hesitated, but only for a moment. I possessed myself of the camp stool, and we started on our homeward journey. We were both silent. The spell of the quiet summer evening was on us. "And all the air a solemn stillness holds," she said softly. "I love this cliff, Mr. Garnet. It's the most soothing place in the world." I found it so this evening." She glanced at me quickly. "You're not looking well," she said. "Are you sure you are not overworking yourself?" "No, it's not that." Somehow we had stopped, as if by agreement, and were facing each other. There was a look in her eyes I had never seen there before. The twilight hung like a curtain between us and the world. We were alone together in a world of our own. "It is because I had offended you," I said. She laughed a high, unnatural laugh. "I have loved you ever since I first saw you," I said doggedly. End of chapter 17. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mark Nelson. Love Among the Chickens by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 18. UKRIDGE Gives Me Advice. Hours after, or so it seemed to me, we reached the spot at which our ways divided. We stopped, and I felt as if I had been suddenly cast back into the workaday world from some distant and pleasanter planet. I think Phyllis must have felt much the same sensation, for we both became on the instant intensely practical and businesslike. "But about your father," I said. "That's the difficulty. He won't give us his consent? I'm afraid he wouldn't dream of it." "You can't persuade him?" "I can in most things, but not in this. You see, even if nothing had happened, he wouldn't like to lose me just yet, because of Nora." "Nora?" "My sister. She's going to be married in October. I wonder if we shall ever be as happy as they will." "Happy? They will be miserable compared with us. Not that I know who the man is." "Why, Tom, of course. You mean to say you really didn't know?" "Tom? Tom Chase?" "Of course." I gasped. "Well, I'm hanged," I said. "When I think of the torments I've been through because of that wretched man, and all for nothing, I don't know what to say." "You don't like Tom?" "Very much. I always did. But I was awfully jealous of him." "You weren't. How silly of you." "Of course I was. He was always about with you, and called you Phyllis, and generally behaved as if you and he were the heroine and hero of a musical comedy, so what else could I think? I heard you singing duets after dinner once. I drew the worst conclusions." "When was that? What were you doing there?" "It was shortly after UKRIDGE had got on your father's nerves, and nipped our acquaintance in the bud. I used to come every night to the hedge opposite your drawing-room window, and brood there by the hour." "Poor old boy." "Hoping to hear you sing. And when you did sing, and he joined in all flat, I used to swear. You'll probably find most of the bark scorched off the tree I leaned against." "Poor old man. Still, it's all over now, isn't it?" "And when I was doing my very best to show off before you at tennis, you went away just as I got into form." "I'm very sorry, but I couldn't know, could I? I thought you always played like that." "I know. I knew you would. It nearly turned my hair white. I didn't see how a girl could ever care for a man who was so bad at tennis." "One doesn't love a man because he's good at tennis." "What does a girl see to love in a man?" I inquired abruptly, and paused on the verge of a great discovery. "Oh, I don't know," she replied, most unsatisfactorily. And I could draw no views from her. "But about father," she said, "what are we to do?" "He objects to me. He's perfectly furious with you." "Blow, blow," I said, "thou winter wind, thou art not so unkind. He'll never forgive you, as man's ingratitude. I saved his life, at the risk of my own. Why, I believe I've got a legal claim on him. Who ever heard of a man having his life saved and not being delighted when his preserver wanted to marry his daughter? Your father is striking at the very root of the short story writer's little earnings. He mustn't be allowed to do it." "Jerry," I started. "Again," I said. "What?" "Say it again, do, please, now." "Very well. Jerry." It was the first time you had called me by my Christian name. I don't suppose you've the remotest notion how splendid it sounds when you say it. There is something poetical, almost holy about it. "Jerry, please." "Say on." "Do be sensible. Don't you see how serious this is? We must think how we can make father consent." "All right," I said. "We'll tackle the point. I'm sorry to be frivolous, but I'm so happy I can't keep it all in. I've got you, and I can't think of anything else." "Try." "I'll pull myself together. Now, say on once more." "We can't marry without his consent." "Why not?" I said, not having a marked respect for the Professor's whims. "Gretna Green is out of date, but there are registrars." "I hate the very idea of a registrar," she said with decision. "Besides—" "Well?" "Poor father would never get over it. We've always been such friends. If I married against his wishes, he would—oh, you know—not let me near him again and not write to me. And he would hate it all the time he was doing it. He would be bored to death without me." "Who wouldn't?" I said. "Because, you see, Nora has never been quite the same. She has spent such a lot of her time on visits to people that she and father don't understand each other so well as he and I do. She would try and be nice to him, but she wouldn't know him as I do. And besides, she will be with him such a little now that she is going to be married." "But look here," I said, "this is absurd. You say your father would never see you again and so on if you married me. Why? It's nonsense. It isn't as if I were a sort of social outcast. We were the best of friends till that man Hawke gave me away like that." "I know, but he's very obstinate about some things. You see, he thinks the whole thing has made him look ridiculous, and it will take him a long time to forgive you for that." I realized the truth of this. One can pardon any injury to oneself unless it hurts one's vanity. Moreover, even in a genuine case of rescue, the rescued man must always feel a little aggrieved with his rescuer when he thinks the matter over in cold blood. He must regard him unconsciously as the super regards the actor-manager, indebted to him for the means of supporting existence, but grudging him the limelight and the centre of the stage and the applause. Besides, everyone instinctively dislikes being under an obligation which they can never wholly repay. And when a man discovers that he has experienced all these mixed sensations for nothing, as the Professor had done, his wrath is likely to be no slight thing. Taking everything into consideration, I could not but feel that it would require more than a little persuasion to make the Professor bestow his blessing with that genial warmth with which we like to see in our fathers-in-laws elect. "You don't think," I said, "that time, the great healer, and so on, he won't feel kindlier disposed towards me, say, in a month's time?" "Of course he might," said Phyllis, but she spoke doubtfully. "He strikes me, from what I have seen of him, as a man of moods. I might do something one of these days which would completely alter his views. We will hope for the best." "About telling father." "Need we, do you think?" I said. "Yes, we must. I couldn't bear to think that I was keeping it from him. I don't think I've ever kept anything from him in my life. Nothing bad, I mean." "You count this among your darker crimes, then?" "I was looking at it from father's point of view. He will be awfully angry. I don't know how I shall begin telling him." "Good heavens!" I cried. "You surely don't think I'm going to let you do that? Keep safely out of the way while you tell him? Not much! I'm coming back with you now, and we'll break the bad news together." "No, not tonight. He may be tired and rather cross. We had better wait till tomorrow. You might speak to him in the morning." "Where shall I find him?" "He is certain to go to the beach before breakfast for a swim." "Good. I'll be there." "Ukridge," I said when I got back, "I want your advice." It stirred him like a trumpet blast. I suppose when a man is in the habit of giving unsolicited counsel to every one he meets, it is as invigorating as an electric shock to him to be asked for it spontaneously. "Bring it out, laddie," he replied cordially. "I'm with you. Here, come along into the garden, and state your case." This suited me. It is always easier to talk intimately in the dark, and I did not wish to be interrupted by the sudden entrance of the hired man or Mrs. Beale, of which there was always a danger indoors. We walked down to the paddock. Ukridge lit a cigar. "Ukridge," I said, "I'm engaged." "What?" A huge hand whistled through the darkness and smote me heavily between the shoulder blades. "By Jove, old boy, I wish you luck. 'Pon my Sam I do. Best thing in the world for you. Bachelors are mere excrescences. Never knew what happiness was till I'm married. When's the wedding to be?" "That's where I want your advice. What you might call a difficulty has arisen about the wedding. It's like this. I'm engaged to Phyllis Derrick." "Derrick? Derrick? You can't have forgotten her. Good Lord, what eyes some men have! Why, if I'd only seen her once I should have remembered her all my life." "I know now. Rather a pretty girl, with blue eyes." I stared at him blankly. It was not much good, as he could not see my face, but it relieved me. "Of course, yes," continued Ukridge. "She came to dinner here one night with her father, that fat little buffer." "As you were careful to call him to his face at the time, confound you! It was that started all the trouble." "Trouble? What trouble?" "Why, her father." "By Jove, I remember now. So worried lately, old boy, that my memory's gone groggy. Of course. Her father fell into the sea, and you fished him out. Why, damn, it's like the stories you read." "It's also very like the stories I used to write. But they had one point about them which this story hasn't. They invariably ended happily, with the father joining the hero's and heroine's hands and giving his blessing. Unfortunately, in the present case, that doesn't seem likely to happen." "The old man won't give his consent?" "I'm afraid not. I haven't asked him yet, but the chances are against it." "But why? What's the matter with you? You're an excellent chap, sound in wind and limb. And didn't you tell me once that if you married, you came into a pretty sizable bit of money?" "Yes, I do. That part of it is all right." Ukridge's voice betrayed perplexity. "I don't understand this thing, old horse," he said. "I should have thought the old boy would have been all over you. Why, damn! I never heard anything like it. You saved his life. You fished him out of the water." "After chucking him in, that's the trouble." "You chucked him in?" "By proxy." I explained. Ukridge, I regret to say, laughed in a way that must have been heard miles away in distant villages in Devonshire. "You devil!" he bellowed. "'Pon my Sam, old horse, to look at you one would have never thought you had it in you." "I can't help looking respectable." "What are you going to do about it?" "That's where I wanted your advice. You're a man of resource. What would you do in my place?" Ukridge tapped me impressively on the shoulder. "Laddie," he said, "there's one thing that'll carry you through any mess." "And that is?" "Cheek, my boy, cheek. Gall. Nerve. Why, take my case. I never told you how I came to marry, did I? I thought not. Well, it was this way. It'll do you a bit of good, perhaps, to hear the story, for, mark you, blessings weren't going cheap in my case either. You know Milly's Aunt Elizabeth, the female who wrote that letter? Well, when I tell you that she was Milly's nearest relative, and that it was her consent I had to snaffle, you'll see that I was faced with a bit of a problem." "Let's have it," I said. "Well, the first time I ever saw Milly was in a first-class carriage on the Underground. I'd got a third-class ticket, by the way. The carriage was full, and I got up and gave her my seat, and as I hung suspended over her by a strap, damn, I fell in love with her then and there. You've no conception, laddie, how indescribably ripping she looked, in a sort of blue dress with a bit of red in it, and a hat with thingummies. Well, we both got out at South Kensington. By that time I was gasping for air and saw that the thing wanted looking into. I'd never had much time to bother about women, but I realized that this must not be missed. I was in love, old horse. It comes over you quite suddenly, like a tidal wave." I know. Good heavens, you can't tell me anything about that." "Well, I followed her. She went to a house in Thurlow Square. I waited outside and thought it over. I had to get into that shanty and make her acquaintance, if they threw me out on my ear. So I rang the bell. 'Is Lady Lickenhall at home?' I asked. You spot the devilish cunning of the ruse, what? My asking for a female with a title was to make 'em think I was one of the upper 10. "How were you dressed?" I could not help asking. "Oh, it was one of my frock-coat days. I'd been to see a man about tutoring his son, and by a merciful dispensation of Providence there was a fellow living in the same boarding-house with me who was about my build, and had a frock-coat, and he had lent it to me. At least, he hadn't exactly lent it to me, but I knew where he kept it, and he was out at the time. There was nothing the matter with my appearance. Quite the young duke, I assure you, laddie, down to the last button. 'Is Lady Lickenhall at home?' I asked. 'No,' said the maid, 'nobody that name here. This is Lady Lakenheath's house.' So, you see, I had a bit of luck at the start, because the names were a bit alike. Well, I got the maid to show me in somehow, and once in, you can bet I talked for all I was worth. Kept up a flow of conversation about being misdirected and coming to the wrong house. Went away and called a few days later. Gradually wormed my way in. Called regularly, spied on their movements. Met 'em at every theatre they went to, and bowed, and finally got away with Milly before her aunt knew what was happening, or who I was, or what I was doing, or anything." "And what's the moral?" "Why, go in like a mighty rushing wind. Bustle 'em. Don't give 'em a moment's rest or time to think or anything. Why, if I'd given Milly's Aunt Elizabeth time to think, where should we have been? Not at Combe Regis together, I'll bet. You heard that letter, and know what she thinks of me now, on reflection. If I'd gone slow and played a timid waiting game, she'd have thought that before I married Milly instead of afterwards. I give you my honest word, laddie, that there was a time, towards the middle of our acquaintance, after she had stopped mixing me up with the man who had came to wind the clocks, when that woman ate out of my hand. Twice, on 2 separate occasions, she actually asked my advice about feeding her toy Pomeranian. Well, that shows you. Bustle 'em, laddie, bustle 'em." "Ukridge," I said, "you inspire me. You would inspire a caterpillar. I will go to the Professor. I was going anyhow, but now I shall go aggressively. I will prize a father's blessing out of him if I have to do it with a crowbar." "That's the way to talk, old horse. Don't beat about the bush. Tell him exactly what you want and stand no nonsense. If you don't see what you want in the window, ask for it. Where did you think of tackling him?" "Phyllis tells me that he always goes for a swim before breakfast. I thought of going down tomorrow and waylaying him." "You couldn't do better, by Jove," said Euclid suddenly. "I'll tell you what I'll do, laddie. I wouldn't do it for everybody, but I look on you as a favourite son. I'll come with you and help break the ice." "What?" "Don't you be under any delusion, old horse," said Ukridge paternally. "You haven't got an easy job in front of you, and what you'll need more than anything else, when you really get down to brass tacks, is a wise, kindly man of the world at your elbow, to whoop you on when your nerve fails, and generally stand in your corner and see that you get a fair show." "But it's rather an intimate business." "Never mind. Take my tip and have me at your side. I can say things about you that you would be too modest to say for yourself. I can plead your case, laddie. I can point out in detail all that the old boy will be missing if he gives you the miss in baulk. Well, that's settled then. About 8 tomorrow morning, what? I'll be there, my boy. A swim will do me good." End of chapter 18.